The pounding started before I even thought to move. Deep metallic thuds that didn't sound like a neighbor and didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. It sounded like a delivery. It sounded like an order from authority, like someone had decided I didn't have a right to sleep in my own house anymore. I sat upright in bed, heart already racing. For a second, I didn't know what day it was. Then I saw the weak gray light leaking through the blinds and the clock on my nightstand. Just past 7 a.m. My throat felt heavy, like I'd swallowed cotton. I pulled on a hoodie and moved down the hallway, careful with my steps out of habit, like the house might wake up and scold me for existing. The pounding on the door started again, followed by a male voice. "Marshall's office. Open the door." My hands went cold instantly. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I moved the way you move when you learn that panic makes you sloppy. And sloppy becomes a story people tell about you afterward. I turned on the porch light and looked through the peephole. A marshal stood at my front door, wearing a tan uniform with a black vest, one hand holding a clipboard with papers. Behind him, his patrol car sat at the curb with the lights off, like he'd decided not to wake the whole street. Then I saw them across the street, half in shadow. My parents stood near the neighbor's mailbox like spectators at a parade. My mother's arms were crossed. My father's hands were in his coat pockets. They weren't surprised to see a law enforcement officer on my porch. They were satisfied. I opened the door with the chain still on. "Sir," the marshal said, calm but firm. "Are you Daniel Carter?" "Yes," I answered. He looked down at the papers. "I'm Marshal Rodriguez from the county marshal's office. I'm here regarding an unlawful detainer case. It's an eviction order." The word eviction hit me like a punch to the stomach. "This is my house," I said. My voice didn't shake because I didn't let it. There must be some mistake. Marshal Rodriguez didn't react. He'd heard that line hundreds of times and probably hated what came next every single time. "Sir," he said, "I'm not here to debate ownership. I'm here to enforce a court order." I stared at the page in his hand. My name was printed in sharp black letters, like I was a tenant who'd fallen behind on rent. Not the person who paid the property taxes, replaced the roof shingles, and planted the tree in the backyard with my grandfather when I was a teenager. My mother called out from across the street, loud enough to carry. "You should have done what the family asked." My father added, his voice flat like a verdict. "Pack up. This is happening today." Marshal Rodriguez's eyes flicked toward them, then back to me. He lowered his voice slightly. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question wasn't kind. It was procedural, but it still twisted something in my gut. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not until you show me what this is." He lifted the first page slightly and tilted it so I could read without having to step outside. There was in bold print, "Writ of possession," a case number underneath, a court seal, a judge's signature I didn't recognize. My pulse tried to spike. I held it back. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask my parents why, because I already knew the answer. They didn't need a reason that made sense. They just needed a reason that sounded acceptable to strangers. I pointed to the line near the top. "Who filed this?" Marshal Rodriguez's gaze followed my finger. He hesitated just long enough to tell me the answer mattered. "Sir," he said carefully, "the plaintiff in this case." He paused mid-sentence, looked at the papers, then looked at me again, and his expression shifted. It wasn't shock, not pity, but recognition, like someone had just realized the villain had been in plain sight. He cleared his throat once and said the case was filed by Margaret Carter and Robert Carter. My parents didn't even pretend to look embarrassed. My mother's chin lifted like she was proud of the sentence being read aloud. I felt something go quiet inside me. A clean, cold quiet. Because if the plaintiff was my parents, that meant they hadn't just threatened me. They'd filed in court and become the reasonable side of the story. And if there was a court order, it meant they'd already gotten a judgment without me. I kept my voice calm. "When was this case filed?" Marshal Rodriguez consulted the page. "Judgment was entered last week." "Last week?" My mouth went dry. "I've been here last week. I'd gone to work, come home, watered the plants, and slept in this bed. I hadn't appeared in court. I hadn't been served anything. No process server at my door, no certified mail, no notice taped to the window. Where was I served?" I asked. Marshal Rodriguez looked down again, and this time his pause was heavier. He ran his thumb across a section, scanning it. The service address listed is 128 Maple Terrace. I didn't answer because my brain was already refusing the reality. Maple Terrace wasn't my address, and it wasn't any address I'd had in my adult life. It was the small rental house my parents had lived in 15 years ago before they moved out. The place with the cracked driveway and the mailbox tilted like a tired tooth. A place I hadn't set foot in since high school. "That's not my address," I said calmly. "That's not where I live." Marshall Rodriguez's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't say, "I know." He said, "It's what's listed on the service return." My mother called out again, her voice sweeter now, like she was performing for the marshal. "We try to do this the easy way, Daniel. You forced us." I didn't look at her. I looked at Marshall Rodriguez. "Can you show me the service return?" I asked. He turned a page carefully. "Sir, I can show you what I have." He tilted the screen so I could read. A single line stating service was completed, a signature, date, time, and a description that made my skin crawl. Substitute service accepted by adult female occupant at Maple Terrace. Adult female occupant at Maple Terrace. My parents had used an address they controlled and claimed someone received papers on my behalf. I slowly began to look across the street. My mother stared back at me with a calm, practiced face, like she'd already rehearsed what this day would look like. And in that moment, I understood the true purpose of the eviction. It wasn't just to humiliate me. It was to rush me, force me to pack up, leave, lose control of the house, leave me so scattered I couldn't fight back in time. Because if I couldn't get a judge to stop this, a marshal would legally remove me from the house my grandfather left me. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice low. This house belonged to my grandfather, I told Marshall Rodriguez. He left it to me. Marshall Rodriguez didn't argue. He just gripped the papers tighter, like he hated being the delivery vehicle for other people's cruelty. "Sir," he said, "if you believe the order was obtained improperly, you need to contact the court immediately and file an emergency motion." "I can't tell you how to do that." I nodded once. "Understood." He looked down, then up, and his voice became even more cautious. "There's one more thing," he said. "This writ authorizes same-day possession." My stomach dropped. Same day. He looked me straight in the eye, professional and not unkind. "Without a stay from a judge," he said, "I have to clear this house by noon." I didn't stand there arguing with a law enforcement officer at my door. Arguing would have given my parents what they wanted, a scene, a story, and a reason to point and say I was unstable. So I did the only thing that mattered. I built a record. I asked Marshall Rodriguez to hold the paperwork still while I took clear photos of every page. The case number, the court seal, the signature line, the service address, the service return language. Then I went back inside. I closed the door carefully and locked it like that might buy me more time. It didn't, but documentation could. Through the window, I could still see my parents across the street, watching like they were waiting for me to start throwing boxes onto the lawn. My mother had that same satisfied stillness she used to wear when she thought she'd cornered me into compliance. I didn't give her the satisfaction of movement. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, my phone, and a small fireproof bag from the drawer where I kept the boring things that become life or death when other people decide to get creative. My copy of the deed, my grandfather's estate distribution letter, the property tax payment receipts, and the homeowner's insurance policy in my name. Then I called the court clerk while I was still standing in my kitchen. The phone rang twice. Civil Division. A woman's voice answered firm. "I have an eviction writ," I said calmly. "I was never served. I need to know how to request an emergency stay and vacate a default judgment." There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking, the kind of pause that meant she'd pulled up the case number and was deciding how much mercy the system was willing to offer at 7 in the morning. "What's the case number?" she asked. I read it off the page. She typed again, this time for longer. Then her voice shifted slightly, less rehearsed. "Sir," she said, "this is an unlawful detainer case filed by Robert and Margaret Carter. Default judgment was entered last week." "I was never served," I repeated. "The service address listed is Maple Terrace." "That's not my address." Another pause. More keys. "I see the return," she said carefully. "It says substitute service was accepted by an adult female occupant." "That would be my mother," I said. And my voice stayed calm, because if I let anger carry me, I'd lose time. What do I do now? You need to file an emergency motion to stay execution of the judgment, she said. And a motion to vacate the default. How fast can this be heard? I asked. She hesitated. It depends on the judge's calendar. It has to be heard today, I said. The marshal said he has to clear the house by noon. The clerk sighed softly, like she didn't like what she was about to say, but was going to say it anyway. Come to the courthouse as soon as we open, she said. Bring ID and proof of address. Bring any proof that you weren't properly served. And if you have proof of ownership, bring that too. I have it, I said. Good, she replied. And sir, don't delay. If the writ gets executed, it gets a lot harder. Harder meant the kind of difficult that bankrupts people financially and then calls it procedure. I ended the call, grabbed my bag, and went back to the front door. Marshal Rodriguez was still on my porch, waiting with the patience of a man who didn't like his job. My parents were still across the street, unmoving. I opened the door again, chain still on. I'm going to the courthouse, I told the marshal. I'm filing an emergency stay motion. He nodded once. That's what you need to do. My mother called out. The sweetness turned venomous. You can file whatever you want. It's already done. Marshal Rodriguez's jaw tightened at her tone, but he didn't respond. He just looked at me. Sir, he said, voice lower. I'm not allowed to give legal advice, but I can tell you this. If you get a stay order, call our civil unit immediately. They'll instruct me not to execute. Understood, I said. Can you give me the civil unit number? He hesitated, then wrote it on the corner of a card and slid it toward the crack in the door. My father spoke up again, louder this time. Pack your things. Don't make this ugly. I met his gaze across the street and kept my voice low. You made it ugly when you lied to a judge, I said. My mother's face twitched, but she smiled anyway, like she thought my words didn't matter anymore. I closed the door without saying anything else to them. Then I walked out the back door, went around the fence, and got in my car without having to pass them like they owned the sidewalk. On the drive to the courthouse, the sky lightened to that pale morning color that makes everything look harmless. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind wasn't. I kept thinking about Maple Terrace, about my parents signing documents meant for me, and then pretending the court had notified me, about how easily a lie becomes a judgment when you don't know you're supposed to show up. When the courthouse doors opened, I was already there. The building smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. The security guard at the metal detector looked half asleep until I put the writ paperwork in the tray and said, I have an eviction being executed today. His eyes narrowed. He waved me through faster than anyone else in line. Upstairs, the civil division counter had a small line of people holding folders the way drowning people hold air. I waited my turn without moving because every movement felt subject to interpretation. When I reached the window, I slid my ID and photos of the writ forward. I need an emergency stay and a motion to vacate, I said. I was never served. The service address is wrong. The clerk, a man with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his collar, typed in my case number and frowned almost immediately. Are you at this address? He asked, reading from the file. No, I said. That address is my parents' old house. I never lived there as an adult. He clicked again, opened a scan document, and rotated the monitor slightly, so I could see a proof of service with a signature space and a description of the adult occupant who supposedly accepted the papers. My stomach turned. The signature was a scribble, but the handwriting of the printed name below it was neat. Margaret Carter. My mother hadn't even bothered to hide it. She signed it, I said quietly. The clerk's eyebrows lifted slightly. She's the plaintiff. Yes, I answered. And she accepted service on my behalf at an address where I don't live. He stared at the screen a moment longer than necessary. Then he did something that showed me he wasn't just going through motions. He printed the service form and slid it under the glass. Highlight that, he said quietly. It matters. I took the paper with steady hands because I refused to let the system label me as emotional. I'm also the property owner, I said, and pulled the deed copy from my fireproof bag along with the estate distribution letter. My grandfather's name was at the top, and my name was listed as the secondary recipient of the property. The clerk looked at the deed and blinked. Then he typed again, faster. Your parents filed this as owners, he said, voice strained. They're claiming you're a tenant who's overstaying. A tenant, I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. He clicked on another scanned image and rotated the monitor again. A one-page rental agreement. My name typed at the top. My parents' names typed under landlord. A signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine, but wasn't. It looked like someone had tried to copy my handwriting from an old birthday card and gotten bored halfway through. They forged it, I said. The clerk didn't say yes. Clerks don't say yes. He said, if you want the judge to see this today, you need to file your emergency motion now. I can give you the forms and a request for hearing. He passed me a packet through the slot, thick, stapled, still warm from the printer. The words emergency motion to stay were at the top like a lifeline. Which judge? I asked, and he consulted the calendar. Judge Morrison is assigned. Can I speak to her this morning? I asked. He hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder toward an interior door that said judicial assistant. I can try, he said. But you need to understand. I understand. I interrupted gently. If I don't get a stay, a marshal is clearing my house at noon. The clerk nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and took my packet back to get it stamped. The stamp came down with a heavy thud, ink bleeding across paper, a sound that made everything real. He returned my stamped document. Go to Department 14, he said. Ask the assistant for an emergency time slot. I turned to leave, but he added, voice lower, Mr. Carter. I looked back. He gestured toward the deed I held in my hand. If that deed is recorded in your name, your parents' eviction case has a standing problem. Judges don't like standing problems. I didn't thank him like he'd done me a favor. I thanked him like he'd given me a weapon I knew how to use. In the hallway outside Department 14, I sat on a wooden bench and filled out the motion with slow, clean handwriting. No rush, no tremor, every line deliberate. And when I got to the section asking for supporting evidence, I listed exactly what the record already showed. Wrong address. Plaintiff signed service. Forged lease. Deed recorded in my name. Then I stood, walked to the assistant's window, and slid my packet under the glass. The assistant read the first page, then the second. Then her eyes stopped at the proof of service. Her expression changed. Not dramatic, just alert. She looked up at me. You're saying the plaintiff accepted service on behalf of the defendant? Yes, I said. She stared at me for a long second, then stood without saying anything else and disappeared through the door behind her. I waited, hands folded, breathing calmly, listening to muffled voices inside the judge's chambers. When the door opened again, the assistant came back holding my packet like it had suddenly become heavier. She leaned toward the window and spoke quietly. Judge Morrison will see you, she said. But I need to warn you. Your parents attached another document to the case. And if it's what it looks like, this isn't just an eviction. My stomach tightened. What document? The assistant swallowed. A deed, she said. A recorded deed claiming the house was transferred back to them. My body went cold, but my face stayed still. A deed, I repeated softly. Transferred back to them. The assistant nodded once, her gaze cautious. It's in the case file as evidence. You'll see it when you're in front of the judge. I didn't argue in the hallway. I didn't demand to see it through the glass like a desperate person. I just nodded and said, thank you. Then I followed her through the door into Department 14. The courtroom was smaller than the lobby downstairs, darker, quieter, built for decisions that ruined people elegantly. A few lawyers sat scattered across the benches with laptops open. A man in a wrinkled suit stared at his own hands like he was waiting to be punished. And then I saw my parents. They were seated near the front with a lawyer beside them. A gray-haired man with calm posture. The kind of lawyer people hire when they want the court to presume they're the reasonable ones. My mother wore a soft cardigan and had a worried expression, like she'd come to rescue me from myself. My father stared forward, jaw locked. They didn't look nervous. They looked prepared. When my mother saw me, she gave a small, sad smile, like she was about to demonstrate compassion, and I didn't return it. The bailiff called the case number, and we approached the tables. Judge Morrison sat on the bench and immediately looked at the file with a displeased expression that told me she'd already seen something she didn't like. Good morning, she said. We have an emergency motion to stay execution of a writ of possession. Mr. Carter, you're the defendant." "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. "And you're appearing without counsel today?" "Yes." Her gaze flicked briefly to my parents' lawyer. "Attorney Lawrence Pike, representing the plaintiffs, Your Honor." Judge Morrison nodded and looked at me again. "Mr. Carter, you understand the writ authorizes possession today?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. The marshal said noon. Judge Morrison didn't react to the emotion of that. She reacted to procedure. "And tell me why I should issue an emergency stay." I slid my packet forward, hand steady because I was never properly served. "The proof of service shows the plaintiff accepted substitute service at an address where I don't reside. The address is not mine, and the plaintiff signed the service form." Judge Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "The plaintiff signed the service form?" "Yes," I said. Mr. Pike gave a slight smile, like he was about to explain a technicality. Judge Morrison looked at him. "Counsel, is this correct?" Mr. Pike stood, voice smooth. "Your Honor, service was completed according to law. Substitute service is permitted. The occupant accepted." Judge Morrison raised her hand. "Don't cite statutes at me. Answer the question. Did your client sign as the adult occupant of the property who accepted substitute service?" Mr. Pike hesitated. Then he chose his words carefully. "Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Carter accepted service at the address listed in the complaint as Mr. Carter's last known address." Judge Morrison's gaze turned to me. "Is Maple Terrace your last known address?" "No," I said. "I haven't lived there as an adult. My driver's license, tax bills, and utility bills all reflect my current address." I slid forward my ID and a recent utility bill. Judge Morrison examined them quickly. Then she looked at my mother. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "why did you accept service on behalf of the defendant at an address that is not his residence?" My mother's lips trembled into practiced sadness. "Your Honor," she began softly, "we tried everything. He's unstable. He stopped responding to us. We didn't know what else to do." There was again, unstable, a label meant to make the court stop asking uncomfortable questions. Judge Morrison didn't even blink. "That's not an answer," she said. "Either you knew where he lived, or you didn't." My father leaned forward slightly, voice low. "We were just trying to protect the property." Judge Morrison's eyes stayed sharp. "Protect it from whom?" My father didn't answer. My mother looked down like a saint. Mr. Pike stepped in quickly. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs are the owners of the property. They had to retake possession. The defendant refuses to leave." Judge Morrison's gaze turned to him. "I reviewed the evidence," she said, and her tone became tight. "One of them is a deed." My throat tightened. Judge Morrison pulled a single page from the file and held it up. "Exhibit C is a purported recorded quitclaim deed transferring the property from Daniel Carter to Robert and Margaret Carter 2 weeks ago." My mother took a sharp breath, like she was about to cry. My father's face stayed flat. Judge Morrison looked at me. "Mr. Carter, did you sign a quitclaim deed transferring property to your parents 2 weeks ago?" "No," I said. Mr. Pike's voice came without hesitation. "Your Honor, we have a notarized deed." Judge Morrison's eyes turned to him. "I didn't ask you." Then she looked at me again. "Are you saying the deed is fraudulent?" "Yes," I answered, "and I can prove I wasn't present for any notarization. I was at work that day, and my employer has access records." Judge Morrison's pen stopped moving. "Access records," she repeated. "Yes," I said calmly. "Badge entry and security cameras. Time stamped." Mr. Pike's expression tightened. "Your Honor, this is becoming a title dispute. Estate matters should be handled by a different department." Judge Morrison's gaze hardened. "This isn't an estate matter right now. This is an eviction case filed by people claiming to be owners, supported by a deed the defendant says he never signed, combined with proof of service signed by the plaintiff at the wrong address." She paused, then said the sentence that finally made my parents shift in their seats. "I'm not comfortable enforcing an eviction order based on this record." Mr. Pike opened his mouth. Judge Morrison cut him off. "I'll address the stay issue first," she said. "Mr. Carter, do you have proof of ownership recorded in your name?" "Yes," I said, and I pulled the clerk's stamped copy of the deed I'd requested that morning from downstairs. My property record abstract stamped. Judge Morrison took it, examined it closely, and her eyebrows lifted slightly. "This shows the property was distributed to you through your grandfather's estate," she said, reading. "Recorded last year. Then there's a quitclaim deed from 2 weeks ago transferring the property to your parents." She looked at me again. "And you're denying you signed that quitclaim?" "Yes." Judge Morrison leaned back slightly and stared at the deed. Then she looked at the notary block at the bottom. Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Pike didn't notice fast enough. My parents did. My mother's shoulders stiffened. Judge Morrison tapped her pen on the notary commission number. "Counsel," she said. "Whose notary is this?" Mr. Pike blinked. "Your Honor, whose notary?" Judge Morrison repeated, sharper. Mr. Pike looked down. "It appears to be a notary named Carla Mendez." Judge Morrison looked at my father. "Mr. Carter," she said, "do you know Carla Mendez?" My father's mouth opened and closed. My mother answered for him, voice thin. "She's a friend." Judge Morrison's gaze stayed fixed. "A friend who notarized a deed transferring your son's inherited house to you 2 weeks ago." Mr. Pike tried again, urgency rising. "Your Honor, the deed is recorded. It's presumed valid." Judge Morrison didn't blink. Presumption of validity is not immunity. She turned to the bailiff. "I'm issuing an emergency stay of the writ of possession," she said. "Effective immediately. Notify the marshal's civil unit." My lungs released in a silent, controlled exhale. Judge Morrison continued, voice crisp. "The case is stayed pending hearing on the motion to vacate default and referral for possible fraud related to the deed." My mother's face crumpled. "Your Honor." Judge Morrison looked at her. "Stop," she said. "You don't have the right to speak right now." Then the judge looked at me again. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I need you to understand something. If this deed is fraudulent, you need more than a stay on the eviction. You need to protect title immediately." "I know," I said. Judge Morrison nodded. "Good, because I'm ordering the county recorder's office to be notified of possible fraudulent conveyance." Mr. Pike's face paled. Then Judge Morrison added, calm but definitive, "And I want the notary to appear in person with her journal." My parents went still. My mother's eyes widened slightly, and my father's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. Because a notary journal isn't a story. It's timestamps, signatures, ID documents, thumbprints in some states. It's proof. Judge Morrison closed the file. "Hearing is set for tomorrow morning," she said. "Mr. Carter, bring your employer access records. Plaintiffs will produce the notary and the original deed. If anyone fails to appear, there will be consequences." My mother's lips parted, and for the first time, the mask of concern looked like what it was. Fear. When the judge stepped down, the bailiff handed Mr. Pike the stay order to serve. I took my copy and walked out without looking at my parents. In the hallway, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Marshal Rodriguez." I answered immediately. "I got the stay," I said. His relief was audible. "Copy that," he replied. "Text me a photo of the signed order. I'll notify civil and we'll stand down." "Sending now," I said. I took a clear photo and sent it. Then, as I turned toward the stairs, I heard my mother's voice behind me. Low, urgent, no longer sweet. "You think this ends it?" she hissed. "You don't understand what you've started." I didn't turn around because I understood. If the deed was fake, this wasn't about an eviction anymore. It was about how far my parents were willing to go to steal a dead man's gift from his own son. And tomorrow, with that notary journal on the courtroom table, we'd find out. I didn't go home alone. Not because I was afraid to be in my own house, but because I couldn't stand letting my parents control the environment anymore. After I texted the stay order photo to Marshal Rodriguez, I called the marshal's civil unit number he'd written for me earlier and asked them to confirm receipt of the stay. The clerk's voice was short and neutral. "Yes, sir. We have a stay order logged. Enforcement is suspended." Then I did the next thing quietly, without asking anyone's permission. I went straight to the county recorder's office. It was still early, and the waiting room was crowded. It smelled like paper and old air conditioning. People sat in plastic chairs holding marriage certificates, liquor license releases, property tax bills. No drama, just administration. I took a number and waited. When my number was called, I went to the counter, presented my ID and the recorded deed copy. My grandfather's estate distribution deed and the more recent quitclaim deed that supposedly transferred the property back to my parents. I need to file a fraud alert on my property record, I said. A judge suspended execution today and referred the deed for possible fraud review. The clerk behind the counter, in her 30s with hair pulled back and sharp eyes, looked at the deed number and typed. Her expression changed almost immediately. Sir, she said, this quitclaim was recorded 2 weeks ago. Yes, I said, and it was filed in person, she said, looking closely at the filing notes with the notary acknowledgement attached. I kept my voice calm. I didn't sign it. A judge has ordered the notary to appear tomorrow with her journal. The clerk showed no sympathy. She answered with procedure. Do you have a case number? She asked. I handed it to her. She typed it into a notes field and printed a small form. Fill this out. We'll attach a fraud alert. She added that this puts an alert on the property record, but it doesn't automatically invalidate the deed. However, it places a public warning that the property transfer is being contested and may trigger additional review if anyone tries to record more documents. It was exactly what I needed. I signed a form with my usual signature, slow, clean, and slid it back. The clerk stamped it and added it to the file. Then she did something that put a knot in my stomach again. She clicked on the deed's digital file, opened the scanned image, and zoomed in on the notary block. Can I ask you a question? She said carefully. Yes. She touched the screen with her pen. Do you know why the notary commission number looks odd? I felt my throat tighten. Odd how? She rotated the monitor slightly, so I could see. The commission number had one digit crossed out and rewritten. A small correction, now almost invisible unless you were trained to notice intake problems. That correction should have resulted in a rejection, she said quietly. But it didn't. It went through. I stared at the screen and felt my anger sharpen to focus. A crossed-out digit on a legal acknowledgement isn't a typo. It's an opening. Can you print that image? I asked. She nodded once. Yes, and I'll also print the filing metadata. When she handed me the pages, they were cordial and formal. Exactly what my parents couldn't contest later. I left the recorder's office with the fraud alert confirmation in my bag and drove home. My mind ran like a machine. If the deed was forged, there are only a few ways it could have been recorded. A notary who lied. A signature that wasn't mine. A fake or stolen ID. Someone who believed I wouldn't fight because I'd be too shocked to move. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked normal, quiet, sunlight hitting the wall, porch light off. But my parents' car was parked across the street again. They were still watching. I didn't give them the show they wanted. I went inside, locked the door, and went straight to the kitchen table. Then I did what they never expected me to do. I called my employer, not to complain, not to cry, but to request records. My company's security department answered on the second ring. Security, a man said. This is Daniel Carter. I answered. I need badge access record from 2 weeks ago, specifically the entire day of the 13th. There was a pause. Why? Because a document was recorded claiming I signed it in the presence of a notary that day, I said calmly. And I need to document where I was. The tone on the other end of the line changed instantly. Understood, he said. I'll need an email request and a case number if you have one. I have one, I answered, and I provided it. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He said, we'll pull badge entry and parking gate logs. If cameras still have footage, we'll preserve it. That word felt protective. When I finished the call, I looked out the front window again. My mother was standing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like she was trying to contain impatience. My father stood with his arms crossed, staring at my house like it owed him an apology. Then the doorbell rang. Once, and when I didn't answer, it rang again. I didn't move toward the door. I moved toward my phone. I opened the camera app and started recording. I kept the camera low, capturing the time stamp and the audio. Then I went to the door and spoke through it without unlocking anything. Yes. My mother's voice came sharp through the wood. Open the door. No, I answered. My father's voice came next, controlled. We're here to settle this like family. I kept my tone neutral. You filed an eviction order against me. You forged a lease. You recorded a deed. This isn't family. This is fraud. My mother's voice rose. How dare you? I didn't respond. I asked a question instead. Why did you do this? Silence. Then my father spoke, voice low and cold. Because Grandpa promised the house would stay in the family, he said. And you were making decisions we didn't approve of. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm the family, I said. My mother answered sharply. You're ungrateful. That man would have wanted us to have it. I took a deep breath. He didn't, I said. That's why the deed is in my name. My father's voice dropped even lower, like he was giving a warning. Tomorrow the notary will say you signed. I didn't hesitate. Then tomorrow she'll produce her journal, I said, and it will show what she claims she verified. My mother's voice went sweet again. Too sweet. You don't want to ruin lives over paperwork, Daniel. That sentence told me everything. They weren't afraid of losing the house. They were afraid of what the paperwork would reveal about their attempt to steal it. I kept my voice low. You already chose to ruin things, I said. I'm just making sure it's recorded properly. Then I ended the conversation the way I end all conversations with people who try to manipulate the moment. I stopped talking. Outside, I heard my mother take a sharp breath, then exhale with forced calm. Fine, she said through the door. We'll see you in court. Their footsteps walked away. I didn't stop recording until I heard their car door close. An hour later, I received a notification from my company's security office. Subject: Badge Access Record Request. Date: I opened the attachment, and there it was black on white. Entry time, exit time, internal door access, parking gate. The record showed me entering the building that morning and not leaving before 6 p.m. No break. No time to drive across town, sign a deed, and return without being noticed. Then another email arrived. This one from the county recorder's office. Subject: Fraud Alert Confirmation. Proof of filing attached. Official notice of fraud alert and printed image showing the correction to the notary commission number. I stacked the documents on my table like I was building a wall, because tomorrow wouldn't be about what my parents claimed. It would be about what the notary's journal could preserve. And just before I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. One sentence: if you show up tomorrow, you'll lose more than a house. I felt a chill down my spine. Not because I was scared, but because threats meant they knew what was coming and didn't think they could stop it completely. I didn't respond to the unknown number. I screenshot the threat and saved it in a folder with the case number. I forwarded it to myself with the same subject. Threat received night before hearing. Then I did the most important thing. I went to sleep. Not in peace, not easily, but I forced my body to rest because exhaustion makes us careless. And my parents had built their entire plan around me being too tired, too shocked, too alone to fight. At 8:45 a.m. the next morning, I returned to Department 14 with a single folder and a calm expression. My parents were already there with their lawyer. My mother wore a slightly different cardigan, like she believed costume changes reset the narrative. My father looked impatient, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the bench like he was waiting for permission to take what he decided belonged to him. And sitting behind them, posture rigid, gripping her purse tightly, was the notary, Carla Mendez. And she didn't look anything like I expected. Not arrogant, not confident, just tense like she'd been told to show up and repeat a line. And she was praying no one would ask the wrong question. When the bailiff called the case, Judge Morrison sat on the bench with the same focused expression as yesterday. Only today, it seemed sharper, less tolerant. "Good morning," she said. "We're here to address the defendant's motion to vacate default and the court's concern regarding a recorded quitclaim deed." She looked directly at my parents' lawyer. "Counsel, do you have the original deed?" Mr. Pike stood. "Yes, Your Honor." He held up a manila envelope like it was sacred. Judge Morrison turned her gaze to the notary. "Ms. Mendez," she said, "you're a commissioned notary in this state." "Yes, Your Honor," Carla answered, voice thin. "And you notarized a deed transferring property from Daniel Carter to Robert and Margaret Carter on the 13th, the judge said. "Correct." Carla swallowed. "Yes." Judge Morrison's voice stayed calm. "Then you'll produce your notary journal." Carla hesitated for just a moment. Mr. Pike spoke quickly. "Your Honor, the notarization was performed correctly. The acknowledgement is complete. The journal isn't necessary." Judge Morrison looked at him like he'd just suggested she ignore gravity. "Sit down," she said. Mr. Pike sat. Judge Morrison kept her eyes on Carla. Journal. Now. Carla's hands shook as she opened her purse. She pulled out a small black book, hardcover, edges worn, and held it like it weighed 10 pounds. She carried it to the clerk, who handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Judge Morrison opened it, and the room went silent in that way that makes every breath sound loud. Judge Morrison ran her finger down entries and stopped. She looked up. Ms. Mendez, she said quietly, please tell the court what identification you verified for Daniel Carter on the 13th. Carla blinked rapidly. His driver's license. Judge Morrison looked down again. Your journal entry lists a driver's license number ending in 931. My stomach dropped. My driver's license doesn't end in 931. Judge Morrison looked up again. Mr. Carter, she told me, what are the last 3 digits of your driver's license number? I answered without hesitation. 617. Judge Morrison nodded once. Then she looked at Carla, and the calm in her voice turned into something else, something dangerous. You're telling me the journal doesn't match the defendant's actual license, she said. Explain. Carla's lips parted and closed again. Her eyes flicked to my parents just once, so briefly most people wouldn't have noticed. But Judge Morrison didn't miss anything. Mr. Pike stood too quickly. Your Honor, journals can contain typos. Judge Morrison cut him off. Enough. She turned the journal slightly and read the next line in the entry. This entry lists the signer as Daniel Carter, she said. And below the signature line, there's a scribble that doesn't look like the signature on the defendant's documents. She turned her gaze to Carla. Did you watch Daniel Carter sign this deed in your presence? Carla's voice came out strained. Yes. Judge Morrison didn't raise her voice. She simply picked up the printout I'd handed over yesterday, the one from my employer's access records, and held it up. Mr. Carter, she said, you stated you were at work all day. Yes, I answered. Do you have documentation, she asked, showing you were physically present? Yes, I said, and slid forward the badge records and the certification email from the security office. Then I added the one thing people like my father always forget exists. My parking gate record with license plate, red, and timestamp. Judge Morrison examined the first page, then the second. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at the times. Then she looked at Carla. Ms. Mendez, she said, what time did you notarize this deed? Carla swallowed. Around noon. Judge Morrison consulted the record. The defendant's badge log shows him inside a secure building at noon with internal door access, she said. His parking gate log shows his vehicle inside a control garage. He didn't leave. Carla's face crumpled and her voice wavered slightly. Maybe it was later. Judge Morrison turned the journal again. Your journal states the time as 12:15 p.m., she said. So no, not later. Mr. Pike looked like he wanted to disappear. My mother's hands were clenched, so tight her fingers looked pale. My father stared forward like refusing to look at the evidence would stop it from existing. Judge Morrison set the journal down slowly and leaned forward. Ms. Mendez, she said, are you familiar with the consequences of notarizing a signature you didn't witness? Carla's eyes filled with panic. Yes. Then I'll ask you one final time, Judge Morrison said. Did you witness Daniel Carter sign this deed? Carla's mouth trembled and her eyes turned to my parents again. My mother shook her head faintly, small, desperate. My father didn't move. Carla let out a shaky breath, and when she spoke, the lie finally collapsed under its own weight. No, she whispered. I didn't. The courtroom didn't explode. It just reset, like the truth had flipped a switch and everything in the room was now on a different circuit. Judge Morrison's voice became cold and precise. Thank you, she said. That's all. My mother made a low sound, half gasp, half anger, then shut her mouth quickly like she'd remembered cameras existed. Mr. Pike stood again, voice strained with urgency. Your Honor, this is beyond our scope. Judge Morrison raised her hand. Sit down. He sat. Judge Morrison looked at my parents. Robert Carter, she said. Margaret Carter. Stand up. They stood slowly like gravity had changed. Judge Morrison spoke in a tone that didn't need volume. This court is vacating the default judgment, she said. The writ of possession is dissolved. The unlawful detainer case is dismissed for lack of proper service and lack of standing. My father opened his mouth. Judge Morrison continued. This court is referring the quitclaim deed to the district attorney's office for investigation of fraudulent conveyance and conspiracy, and referring the notary to the appropriate authority for possible revocation. My mother's eyes went wide. Your Honor, Judge Morrison's gaze cut her off. No. And the judge looked at me. Mr. Carter, she said, you should obtain a certified copy of today's order and record it with the county clerk. You should also pursue title correction through appropriate civil channels. Based on what I've seen, you should also consider an emergency restraining order. I will, I said. Judge Morrison nodded once, then delivered the sentence that finally made my parents look scared. And if either plaintiff attempts any further action to remove you from the property, contact law enforcement immediately. This court's orders are not suggestions. The hearing ended with the filing of documents, stamps, and that kind of silence that only comes after people realize the system is no longer on their side. Outside the courthouse, my parents didn't approach me. They couldn't. Mr. Pike avoided my gaze completely, speaking to them in quick, low sentences like he was trying to get them out of the building before someone decided to arrest them. Carla Mendez left in the opposite direction, pale, clutching her purse like a lifeline. And I went straight downstairs to the clerk and requested certified copies. The stamp came down hard, a heavy thud. And again, certified, certified, certified. Then I drove straight to the county recorder's office and recorded the court order on the property record, attaching it to the fraud alert already in place. The clerk who'd helped me yesterday didn't smile. She just nodded once when she saw the judge's signature, like she'd been expecting the paperwork to come through. On my way out, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time it was just one line, shorter than before. Let it go. I still screenshot it. Because people like my parents don't stop because they develop a conscience. They stop because doors close. In the weeks that followed, I watched the consequences unfold without doing anything about them. The recorder's office confirmed the deed was flagged and subject to investigation. The notary commission was under review. My employer's security department preserved footage of me entering the building that morning, which I never left. The marshal's civil unit added the stay order and dismissal to their system, so no one could show up at 7 a.m. with papers and pretend it was routine. And my parents, people who'd spent their whole lives telling me the family name mattered, couldn't look me in the eye without seeing their own signature on a lie. They never apologized. They didn't have the emotional framework to take responsibility. My mother sent an email that tried to rewrite everything as a misunderstanding. My father sent nothing, but I didn't need apologies. I needed my house, and I needed my grandfather's gift to stay where he'd left it, with me, the person he trusted. One evening, I stood in the living room and watched the sunlight come through the windows. The same windows my parents had tried to steal by walking into court with forged documents. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. The kind of quiet you earn when you stop begging for fair treatment and start forcing people to deal with the facts. A few weeks later, the street looked normal again. No marshal's car at the curb. No parent across the street watching like predators. The fraud alert stayed on the property record until the title correction process was complete. And every official letter I received went into the same folder with the case number on the spine. I changed the lock on the front door, installed a small camera on the porch, and kept certified copies of Judge Morrison's order in a safe place. Not because I wanted to live in fear, but because I wanted to live in reality. My parents had proved they'd use institutions as weapons. I learned to use the same institutions as shields. If your parents tried to evict you from the house your grandfather left you, would you confront them first? Or would you do exactly what I did and let the paperwork trap them in their own lie? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories where quiet wins because truth speaks louder than manipulation, like, subscribe, and I'll see you.